Chicago Tribune, April 24th, 2003. North Korean scientists reportedly smuggled into U.S. A network of private mercenaries smuggled North Korean technocrats and scientists to the United States and other Western nations to glean from them the progress of Pyongyang's nuclear program, according to published reports. One defector reportedly was Kyung Won-ha, believed to be the father of North Korea's nuclear program. An American citizen of Asian origin allegedly helped him escape from North Korea into China. The U.S., North Korea, and China opened multilateral talks in Beijing on Wednesday, a diplomatic advance in efforts to curb Pyongyang's nuclear program and its sale of missiles to rogue nations and terrorist networks. So here we are. And where did geopolitics get us? Since this article was published, we've gone from a full 7 minutes to just 85 seconds to midnight, at today's writing anyway. Deep in the storm that had us all caught up in the celebrity-studded, power-lined parties in Beijing during those years leading up to the 2008 Olympics, the articles in the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and elsewhere had flown pretty far over my head. But the articles never mentioned that in a seedy, smoke-filled expat popular bar in Shenyang, China, I'd made friends with an American citizen of Asian origin, a fellow New Yorker, in fact, and his role in smuggling a defecting North Korean intelligence asset was confirmed by a source at the U.S. Embassy when I reported him missing. Sure, we had a shared empathy for North Koreans living under unthinkable restrictions over there, and a lot of other things that didn't mean anything to geopolitics fans, and which were a lot easier to process than anything we experience today, drowning in the social media fire hose. Carnage makes daily encroachments, reported in the same breath as the weather, leaving all the flailing emotions and outrage to be channeled, monetized, then burned out. All that's left is our own experience, relationships, which is where any real battles are won anyway. Dashiell Hammett got to me early. I was 13 when the Continental Op dealt me into detective fiction, and I never quite left the table. Maybe it was the viscerality of the lingo, or that the questions always drew me in more than the answers. And all the while there was also China, one big question all by itself, which was the most isolated, distant place in the universe that could still be investigated, at least for a teenager growing up in New York City in the 80s. The students sitting outside the UN that day in 1989 reluctantly let me photograph them, protesting the Tiananmen Square massacre. Their real presence was a welcome salve to Hollywood myth and propaganda from both sides of the bamboo curtain. In high school, I'd opted into a pen pal program. A Spanish teacher who'd also taken up advanced placement advising handed me a little glossy brochure with all the multicolored flags printed on the back. For a kid who'd been groomed on movies like Under Fire and Salvador, who'd already requested a CIA recruitment brochure and visited Contra-ravaged Nicaragua on a socio-political tour, my options didn't stop at Spanish-speaking countries. I went for broke and picked Hong Kong, and the eventual match was a girl named Crystal, just like Joe Gore's character in his 1975 book, and Wim Wenders' 1982 zoetrope film from the book, Hammett. By 1992, past the multicolored lights lined up neatly on the tarmac one night at Kai Tak, the real-life Crystal was a journalism student, dead set on a future that didn't exist. Back then, everyone was romancing a pipe dream for just 5 years down the road in '97. By the time Harrison Ford's wooden plodding narration in Blade Runner over that hauntingly beautiful rainy mess that forever warped my DNA the same year as the Hammett film, dystopia had become overhyped. The disco for it in Lan Kwai Fong was called Post-97, but there is nothing entertaining or glamorous, though, when China reeled it all back in right on schedule. The anxiety set in soon enough, just like whenever Trump took office, or Munich in 1923. In New York in January of 2001, it was my own time to leave, still fresh from the divorce just a couple of years earlier. December 31st, 1998, New York City. In the fresh Friday evening buzz at the two-story loft in Williamsburg that I shared with an international consortium of struggling New York Film Academy graduates, the facts speckled and dutifully grooved out of a sleek little precision black machine. Sogo Ishii, and these days known as Gakuryu Ishii, had agreed to direct my script Faction for $100,000. When I told Al Giordano, a fellow writer living on West 12th Street in Manhattan, he gave me a mafia kiss, read as such since he'd introduced me to an Italian mafia lawyer at Elaine's who had fiery, wavy red hair and a .38 strapped to his ankle, and also a Peter Falk stand-in at a dramatically lit pool hall in the Village. All this after Al's original offer to introduce me to Abel Ferrara, whose engagement with New Rose Hotel effectively steered him away from our orbit. Tonight, I sat in the back of a limousine that my employer, a club promoter, had rented to bring us and a couple of his girls to China Club on West 47th. If the cops knew Ruben was Ruben Cabrera, he'd be out of the club's racket and in jail by morning. He was especially brave letting me, a novice, in on his real identity. Ruben's partner was Michael Gergoulis, a barely kinder version of Eric Bogosian's Barry in talk radio. Michael saw me as an edge that could help him seize some ground in Manhattan's mafia-ridden nightlife racket. After meeting him through an earlier one-off shoot for a musician playing at Izzy Bar on the Lower East Side, Michael took me in, setting me up at his apartment on 53rd and 10th. The backbone of my work was shooting mini DV video for a club experience they were calling New York Nights. And this turned into a regular callback with Ruben, letting me handle creative output for the projection screen at China Club. New Year's Eve was upon us, but once inside the club, it only took a few drinks to regress into mutual attraction with one of the dancing girls. We were both walking past the exit sign by 11:30. We hitched a cab ride to her lonely Wall Street apartment, and this was the reason I missed the critical moment when Marilyn Manson hit the stage back at the club at midnight. I never worked for Michael again, but I still preferred to enter 1999 that way, unplanned, in a time of life where this kind of one-night affair paid off a good stretch more than some under-the-table, unreportable reputation. In the soft, quiet blue of the early morning, I slipped back out into the cold and down into the J train and emerged back at my base at 282 Broadway in Williamsburg, the first stop in Brooklyn. That two-story bohemian enclave had evolved from a furniture store to a whorehouse to a trash-laden real estate nightmare to a creative ops center. The film graduates were all from Japan, Spain, Portugal, Chile, Malaysia, China, and Queens. The cross-pollination was constant, fertilized by sugar and coffee from the bodega downstairs. My first film was just one of many byproducts. A lot of our conversations at the first-floor wooden dining room table veered casually into current events, driven by some article we'd seen in the papers, still at a pace of information processing that was pleasantly far in advance of the social media firestorm we have to endure today. On one of my many expeditions out to the Lower East Side and West 4th, I wandered into an after-hours bar and met a short-haired beauty trying unsuccessfully to offset her model looks with this punk-worn white tee and rolled-up jeans, who spoke in a soft, perfectly commercial sexy voice with perfect diction, made for radio.
Where am I from? Really?
She downed the shot I just bought her like it was a goodbye. She smiled instead, decided to see how far this would go.
Well, my parents are from Incheon. How about you?
She wanted another meeting and wrote down her number on paper on the back of a bar receipt. Anyone with experience is going to know that this never worked out. Being the poor, starving artist on a perpetual hunt for side hustles, I was in no condition to take on a woman. But the aesthetic stuck on me like a consolation prize that fed into a new idea for a film, in perfect sync and adding to existing momentum from New York Times articles talking about Chinese espionage and North Korean nuclear missiles. I finally settled on a yarn about a Japanese eco-terrorist group looking for revenge against guys who kidnapped a 6-year-old girl in 1980 for experimentation, and who by now had advanced far into the mind control phase of national security. Who did I know who was Japanese and plugged in as an artist who might know the right people? I started with my first serious girlfriend, who was now back at home with her new family in Nagoya. Clueless newbie schlub that I was, I moved past her surprise at hearing from me and the question, "How long have you been working for the FBI?" I asked if she knew any Japanese actors in New York. There was one, Kenji Nakano. We connected heartily, and he proceeded to lead me into a series of more introductions. One of them led me to a screening for Bang, the indie miracle from Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin, Ash, and a meeting with the lead actress, Darling Narita, whose mother I had already encountered at an exhibition of my Nicaragua photographs back at Syracuse University. Nicaragua was just one piece of why I ended up telling the story. Sitting down with Darling at the after party, there was something else in the way, maybe the wariness of a first-timer in the presence of some shade of stardom that still couldn't outshine my reference of having met her mother. Then there was Shauna, a Japanese-American actor whose lunch meeting with her agent brought up Gus Van Sant as director. But this time it was first-timer wariness that got to me, and the chemistry just didn't ignite. Kenji didn't relent, though, and one of his other friends, a strict vegetarian with a penchant for celibacy that would make most monks jealous, most known in Japan in the 80s as a Japanese David Cassidy, proceeded to connect me with Eiko Ishioka. Eiko interpreted the script as an extremely commercial enterprise. I'd give her full creative control, but her Oscar status dictated too many distractions that made realization just impossible. Her inclination to use Pat Metheny, whose This Is Not America ballad with David Bowie still resonates even stronger today, was definitely a sorely missed call. In the course of this process, another Japanese actress, Kimi Suzuki, turned up through another one of Kenji's introductions, Shiro Yamashita, who was then studying in NYU's film program. Shiro invited Kimi to a party he threw in his small 8th Street apartment and introduced us. While not as heavyweight as I'd been hoping for, she did end up shortly afterward playing a prostitute in Abel Ferrara's New Rose Hotel, with Willem Dafoe and Christopher Walken in the same movie based on a William Gibson short story that first appeared in July 1984 Omni magazine. As early as 1998, word was out on the street that Spielberg was going to be casting for Memoirs of a Geisha, and Kimi reached out to me to shoot some promo photographs for her at 282 Broadway of her wearing a kimono to attach to her audition. Needless to say, she didn't make it, though I did end up handing another script to the actress who was finally selected, Zhang Ziyi, in Beijing a few years later. But not only did Kimi carve out a formidable presence as a stuntwoman, maybe most recognized in her appearance as a long-tongued bartender in Men in Black 3, but when I ended up coming back to New York, Kimi was one of 3 personal references I put down on my SF-86 security clearance application form when I joined Army Intelligence and the NSA as part of my reverse course after the 7 years in China, which is, of course, a whole other story, but not the most important one that really gets us anywhere. But putting Kimi down as a reference was what mandated the FBI to make a follow-up visit to her apartment and interview her about my background. And then there was Ariane, who I'd been able to finally meet since a fleeting obsession over 10 years earlier at age 15 after seeing her opposite Mickey Rourke in Year of the Dragon. I'd sent a copy of the script to her agency, Click Models, and they passed it on to her. When I got her voicemail saying that she'd read it and that she liked it a lot, we finally managed to connect over bitter coffee at Zando, an Upper West Side cafe before the cultural decimation propagated by Starbucks. She shared her own obsession with Latin men that factored into her existing status as married with children. It was a social enough meeting, a consummation of desire and the creative process maybe, but she finally had to pass on the project since it was my first, our respective professional and creative timing in tow. That forced me to revert to existing contacts, which went from an actor I'd met at one of the many shoots that we hosted as a set at 282, and his teacher at the Actors Studio, Ernie Martin, whose other students included Sean Penn, Gene Hackman, Al Pacino, Nastasia Kinski, and others. To a friend of Ernie's, Bill Mullen, who played the antagonist, to his Mata Hari-type actress friend, to her friend, who arrived a little late to a diner where Ernie and I interviewed her briefly as she gorged down a cheeseburger and fries. Although she had the look and vibe of the character that I already imagined, Ernie was insistent that models don't make good actresses, and that she'd probably been in regular cocaine-fueled digression. It was only back in Bill Mullen's spacious Amsterdam Avenue apartment after watching the VHS reel that she passed on to me across the table that I realized who she was. I'd never had my jaw spontaneously dislocate and fall to the floor that fast. True to the script, the final digital video art piece was finally anchored down heavily by the female lead, the world's second biggest Asian supermodel, whose last appearance was in a film with Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino. A week after we finished shooting in July 1999, I was already moved in with her, ready to quit Ruben, who, in spite of my falling out with Michael, called me to come in for one more night. The new girlfriend called up a Japanese fan in her entourage named Eri, and the three of us took once more to China Club. Ruben had survived my incompatibility with Michael due to my incompatibility with cocaine. A mountain of the stuff sat on a patio table when Michael took me on a social business visit with Ruby Mazer, who designed the Rolling Stones logo, apparently the reasoning behind the song Ruby Tuesday. Ruby sat down with us and shelled out a few Ektachrome slides onto the table, showing him with some of his buyers, like Harrison Ford and Whoopi Goldberg. But his real obsession was stuck on some girl who turned him on when she walked into his building's laundry room that week, and he just couldn't get up the gumption to ask her out. It was through the description in his ravings about a bartender at Sidewalk Cafe on 6th and A, when again, just like that VHS moment, that creeping realization occurred. I realized I knew who he was talking about. Daisy, I said, and he lit up like a bomb in the dark.
Daisy, that was her name. You know her?
Yeah, we chat at the bar now and again, I said.
You hook me up with her and I'll hook you up big time,
he said. Sidewalk Cafe was probably the most coveted dive bar in the Lower East Side, and Daisy Kiang probably its most coveted bartender. The list of performers vying for open mic night at Sidewalk was always long, a milestone privilege for any aspiring performer that was really tough to land. I'd met a few interesting locals there, like a young actor who'd gotten his first break from Ed Harris for a bit part in The Abyss. On another night, there was Rocket's Red Glare, the killer redneck caller in Oliver Stone's talk radio, who bragged about bringing Madonna to climax by slapping her vagina with his fingers. Bar talk is never something to bet on. It has a life of its own, especially at Sidewalk. Next time I was there a few days later, I arrived just after nightfall and started up a conversation again. Hey, Daisy.
Hey, Jack and Coke?
Yeah, thanks. She came back with the glass, sat it down with a thin red straw and a fresh napkin. Hey, Daisy, you know this guy named Ruby, an artist? He created the Rolling Stones logo, I asked, taking a sip. The look Daisy gave me in return. No more words were said between us that night. The next time we spoke, it was New Year's Eve, 2008, after I'd returned from China. Daisy was now a manager at the bar. "I can't believe you remember that," she said, laughing, both of us with champagne in hand. The 7 years that I'd spent in China never came up in our brief reunion, though, because I was still processing the fact that I had survived. 5 friends had died from either drug overdose or suicide. Spies, supermodels, gangsters, celebrities, diplomats, and hookers drank, smoked, and had other types of fun together in a club called Neo Lounge. I swam among them as a commercial and fashion photographer, while music evolved light years and single leaps forward. And after he helped a North Korean intelligence asset escape through Beijing around the time of the six-party talks, a fellow New Yorker had disappeared. The geopolitical implications of his disappearance were not what initially bothered me. By the end of 1999, I'd already made friends with Mike and Max, a couple of hackers I'd met at the monthly 2600 gathering in Manhattan every first Friday at the Citicorp building by the lobby payphones. I had the idea to learn what I could and integrate it all into a screenplay I was writing about an international gaggle of former national security employees who'd unified to combat something bigger, darker, and uglier that they'd all come up against in their various past missions from different angles. A few months later, we'd barely sat down to review the latest version of the script before another new member decided to crash our table with a copy of the I Love You virus on a Memorex CD, barely a day after the attack. When he was only 15, Mike Hudak had already been identified by CNN as a promising young hacker teen who had refused FBI employment, but had managed to retain his contacts there, choosing to maintain his sense of integrity and otherwise eke out a living, as he called it. Just a few years later, Mike was now fully committed, firing on all cylinders, in a venture called Knowledge Propulsion Laboratories up in Norwalk, and he invited me to come witness firsthand the fierce battles against brick walls, the mighty mental throes of a fledgling tech startup. After half a day, our mutual interest in independent film took over, and we decided to check out The Way of the Gun at a local theater once I'd been offered a sleepover on the office couch, instead of schlepping it back to New York on the last train. Mike had already slept over one other night on my ex's couch back at Gramercy Park, before the breakup that came just months later, a barely survivable event that just added fuel to the coming takeoff. And by the next morning, over coffee and bagels at a small cafe near the train station, I'd let Mike in on my decision to finally venture out to China, to finally live out a dream to vanquish the last great mystery that lay ahead, a dream I'd held for over a decade, but never really had the chance to fulfill until now. If the idea was to maintain confidentiality in our most progressive and revealing conversations, email or any other interceptable communication wasn't really an option. So right there at the table by the sunlit window, Mike confided that he had access to a classified report on China called Dragon Lord and a Canadian CSIS secret document called Sidewinder. We went back to KPL and Mike handed the file to me on a flash drive, along with a new laptop, a going-away present that Michael Dell had sent to him, a superfluous toy that was left otherwise untouched, in favor of more secure, custom-made machines. Sidewinder fed my Tom Clancy-esque interest in the larger picture, not far from the intellectual aspirations that had appealed to me since the CIA had sent me a career brochure when I was only 16, the circumstances of which are to come later in the story. But the high-level infiltration of key American and Canadian institutions by what the FBI was calling the unholy trinity, organized crime, criminal triads, the Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese business tycoons, didn't lock on very hard for someone who was already overly preoccupied with a major life transition. But it wouldn't be the last time that sensitive geopolitics would come knocking on my door. But right before I'd ventured out to China, I worked on Wall Street where media and money met. Walking from my nice open cubicle lit by dull gray daylight through the rain and mist, outside lofty windows that drown out the noise from below, I'd make regular checks at the appointed hour and pull select delectable info morsels from the Bloomberg terminal in a quiet little area by itself. After about an hour, I'd have the day's rundown ready for JP Morgan's intranet, deciding what news people at work would see and what they wouldn't see, dropping quick sell blurbs across the headlines page. It was a break from the usual supermodel girlfriend who complained on the regular she could never land a leg up from the movie she'd done with Pacino more than a year ago. But this was New York, where attention spans had long caught up with MTV. If you'd already had 5 minutes of fame as just a day player, you weren't going to gain any more critical mass and would have to make room for everyone else. She came back from the Hennessy shoot with the makeup still on, worth every cent they paid. After all the bickering between the art director, the client, and the agency, it was the photographer who laid it down pretty hard as to what the shot was going to be, she said. That night, as I watched Eyes Wide Shut with her in her Gramercy Park apartment, I kept the aching awkwardness of the pot-sparked argument scene to myself. It felt like it was written as a perfect setup for everything else that happened in the story. And the familiarity of that flavor of conflict DNA, the way arguments tended to emerge and evolve into out-of-control self-inflictions, resonated just ruthlessly. It was only months before our own final verdict came down hard, the breakup. Since commanding that scene with Pacino and Reeves, she never lost the ability to wield that kind of power on such a careless whim, now back on full global public display, and the Hennessy ads on phone booths and billboards. In the shot, the two models each had a label. One was labeled vegetarian, and the other was labeled man-eater. I don't have to tell you the label they stuck on her. It all seemed almost a supernatural mandate that I now had to memorialize with a bottom line that I also learned a lesson, that I too was lucky to be alive. I had survived. And that I too had to tell the world how. Ever since I first picked up a camera with serious intentions, all I ever wanted was a muse, someone who could help both creatively and in the relationship department at the same time. I mean, what could be more perfect? Wake up with someone who understands the obsession you've been self-medicating with, the coping mechanism that so perfectly helped you process the mess of not just one, but 2 parental divorces, and also all the mess and confusion of New York City. Photography only requires one other person, the subject. And what better subject than one you can collaboratively pursue ultimate beauty with? Ultimate beauty is subjective, sure. But what else were all those images I grew up with on the pages of Rolling Stone magazine really about? Herb Ritts, Annie Leibovitz, Bruce Weber. Hell, just walking around on the streets of New York every day as a teenager was enough to get inundated by commercial beauty. And if all beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then what is commercial beauty, you might ask? And the answer to that is, commercial beauty is always in the eye of the photographer. December 29th, 1997, Chelsea Hotel, 23rd and 7th, 6:42 a.m. The guest receipt for the club sandwich lay crumpled on a plate over the crumbs, next to an empty water glass. I sat on the end of the unkempt bed, lost in thought, as the soft quiet blue of the early morning made the invisible weight of post-sex suspense in the room just a little bit lighter. The limber body with long black hair lay naked and still, with her eyes open, trapped in her own kind of limbo. The future had taken root in the present, but we'd moved too fast for feelings, and then our choices got buried in the noise of money and our 9-to-5s the very next Monday. She finally slid out of bed, pulled on the bottom half of cotton long underwear, drew up a chair from the desk across from the bed, and sat down to look at me directly, eye to eye. The memory is now a dream so many years later, speaking from another dimension, eye to eye with the ex of superhuman beauty, now even more seasoned after the life of a spinster for so many years, manifesting with an oriental carpeted tea room, lived in and ornate. She puts her hands on my face, framing it, her eyes doing all the talking. Malaysia Airlines Staff Hotel, Subang Airport, Malaysia, October 2nd, 2008. I woke up in my Subang Airport staff hotel room arranged for me by my current client, Malaysia Airlines, snapped back into the present. I just finished a month of production, giving them the visual collateral they needed for their boutique twin-prop ATR 500 operation called Firefly. I'd also just dodged a bullet by refusing to photograph Macy Gray, who simply had taken a flight and hadn't signed any release, let alone discussed it with her agent. I was done with this part of the world. I could feel the answer to what I was ultimately supposed to be doing in the still moment, still echoing from the dream. But human language somehow wasn't enough to understand the answer, which maybe I could find if I went back far enough. So I adjusted a chair near the desk, opened my laptop, and began to write. As the years pile on, the dichotomy between forms of pure musical energy that tend to unify us versus the proliferation of tools for our own destruction becomes more apparent. It's a race that no one's sure will win, even though we collectively are both winners and losers in the game. Carl Sagan referenced the Drake equation, technological adolescence, or it could be just dumb luck. The stage has already been set for a long time. Jojo Meyer argued that it all started with drumming, the first form of telecommunication that could be either for spirits or earthbound aggression. But eventually, at some point, rhythm was more synonymous with the beating of life in our own bodies than a fight-or-flight reaction to the terror of scarcity. The beat, like every other tool after, became something that could save us or signal our own destruction. All those eons later, no matter how advanced we thought we'd become, the biggest investments and the latest and greatest always seem to end up in a bigger stick, a louder bang.